In this session, we will go from theory to practice, and I will show you how to design and plan changes to your system's architecture while ensuring that all of your documentation and system diagrams remain up to date. Now, when I roll over the business requirement, I can see that the intercom system and gainsight system are both highlighted. This is because we are going to use gainsight to replace intercom. Now, I'm currently in the published version of this diagram. Let me switch to the draft version. That's where I can make changes to the diagram and prepare all the documentation until it's ready to be released with the new functionality. Okay, let's get cracking. We're going to retire intercom, so I am just going to start removing the intercom card and its relationships to all the adjacent systems. Now, let us speed up this process a little bit. The system landscape diagram is now updated, and we can see that I've updated relationships between gainsight, elements, and Salesforce to show that customer requests or feedback records or customer queries will be moving in and out through gainsight. Now, how is this supposed to work? For this reason, I'm going to now drill down into my level 2 diagram and then drill down even further and go into my automation or interaction diagram. Now, this is a draft diagram we've put together previously, and you can see that we have a bit of a challenge. There's at least two ways we could integrate feedback or user queries raised through gainsight into Salesforce. Would we want to go through email to case integration, or actually build our own bespoke integration using Make? Well, let's consider pros and cons. On the one hand, as the sticky note left here indicates, we already have email to case set up for one of the types of cases. So it might seem a good idea to reuse or replicate that particular integration for other case types or even feedback. However, the challenge is that we do not have additional inboxes, so we would have to create those, and they cost money. Therefore, simply from the cost-benefit perspective, we've decided to go with the integration through Make. So let's change the design. Let me add a bit more detail to the webhook card. I can choose the system, in this case PX, as another resource to specify, where is this webhook triggering. I can add a new attribute to add a bit more detail about what the trigger actually is or when it triggers. In this case, we know when new feedback is raised as opposed to, let's say, when it's updated. I can actually use the right panel to add a bit more detail about the behavior or logic. That way, if anyone rolls over the attribute in the future, they will see a hint text with the full explanation. And just to make my diagram that much nicer looking, I will adjust the styling, the size, alignment of attributes, so it just is that much more compact. Another thing I'm going to do is document why we haven't chosen to go down the route of email to case integration. When you're designing and documenting your system architecture, your automation logic, I would argue it's just as important to document why you haven't done something as it is to document why you have done something. In this case, if anyone ever asks or wants to understand why we've built it a certain way, we become very clear that we've decided to use Make simply as a cost-saving mechanism. Now that we have documented what we want to do, let's design and document what we will want to do. Let me add specifically outcomes, so I know what sort of information or data flows between systems. And let me actually also add a couple of attributes, especially on Make, so that I know what sort of information I will have at my disposal to then move to Salesforce. Now, at this point, I might not know all the information that is available to me. So I will leave this sticky note as a reminder to check what information will actually be available through the JSON. Now, I could create a card that represents Salesforce, but since I will be using two very specific case record types and a feedback object, which is a custom object, I will instead create three separate cards for these objects to document my integration in more detail. Now, this is where we discover the true power of elements. I'm now in my Salesforce metadata dictionary. I am going to find the objects, record types, and any other metadata that will be used in that integration. And I will associate specific cards from my diagram with the chosen metadata components. That way, whether inside Elements or in Salesforce Setup, whenever someone wants to work or change any part of this org, they will be able to come across this specific document and understand how it all fits together. Now, the next step in my journey is to capture and document user stories. I already know I will have to create a new scenario in our Make integration tool. And I also know I will have to configure the webhook in Gainsight PX. So by capturing these stories, I already have record of the work that needs to be done in those separate systems. Now, I'm going to start thinking about what data do I want captured in those target objects once the integration runs successfully. And for that purpose, I'm going to actually use my metadata dictionary once again. And the reason is that I can now see what fields, in other words, what data am I already capturing on either the feedback object or the case object. And I can see whether the fields that we already have might be reused in that integration. In other words, if I can't find the field I'm looking for, I will have to create a new field. But if I can find the existing field, I would be able to reuse it. And I'm now going to associate that particular field with my card in the interaction diagram. And the reason is I am documenting my fields and how they're being utilized whilst I'm designing the new integration. That way, I can make sure that I first and foremost reuse whatever we already have before I potentially create new metadata. And now I'm going to repeat the same process for the case object. I'm going to find it in my metadata dictionary, look at all the fields, and associate them with my diagram. The end result is an interaction diagram that shows precisely what data will be flowing through the systems, and a diagram that is connected to every single metadata component it touches. Now that we have finished with our design, we need to make sure that all other diagrams don't reference intercom and reflect the new configuration. For this purpose, I'm going to run a resource report across all diagrams in this hierarchy. Now, by running this particular report, I can see all the diagrams that reference intercom as the system. Now I can group it by diagram name. And if I collapse all these accordions, which just list specific steps or cards, I will have the list of what seems like 5 other diagrams that currently reference intercom. Let's explore some of the diagrams I identified in the report. We have a level 2 diagram that shows how Salesforce integrates with other systems. We've got its child diagram, which shows configuration of our service cloud. And we've got a very specific interaction diagram that shows how we currently raise cases through intercom. The reason for updating the diagram is not only to make sure no one uses incorrect information. We can also use it in Elements to identify technical debt. In this case, I can see I've got a specific make integration scenario linked to one of my cards. I can now very easily create a new story to ask one of the developers or admins to now retire this integration, since we won't be using it anymore. And I can do the same sort of analysis for my Salesforce metadata. Against these two cards that represent technical case and customer case record types, I see links to specific Salesforce fields. I can open them up in the new tab to investigate them further. When looking at a field or any metadata in Elements Metadata Dictionary, I can see how used it is, how populated this field is. Now in this case, the field doesn't seem to be used anywhere else other than the integration, so I can easily create a story that will specify that that particular field will need to be removed. If I look at another field, I can see I have slightly more documentation. So I can explore it. I can see how it works, how it was built, and again, make a judgment call when documenting the user story, how it should be deleted, and if anything else should be deleted with it. Now, having reviewed this diagram, I know that all components and all metadata referenced in it are going to be deleted once we roll out our new integration. So I can go to the parent diagram, the one that shows our Service Cloud interactions, and I can delete that diagram from the parent. I will have to confirm that I'm happy with that choice. But when I do, it will no longer exist in the draft version of this map. And if I navigate even further up to its parent, I can delete Intercom and its interactions with our Salesforce org and update how Gainsight interacts or will interact with our org going forward. By following this process, I have updated all diagrams in the draft version across all types, all levels, to ensure that our documentation is accurate. A commonly asked question is, where should I create my diagrams? Especially interaction diagrams that might be touching multiple systems. There are two approaches. One, that I've demonstrated at the beginning, is to simply pick one most central system in your system landscape and drill down from there to capture the automation or the interaction diagram in its entirety. However, I will now demonstrate a different approach. Let me go back to the Service Cloud diagram, and I will attempt to capture the process of creating cases from Gainsight PX in this diagram. Now, I want to actually capture more detail. I will create a new child diagram, and then I will copy and then paste the parts of my original interaction diagram that relate to case object. I will then create a line with a connector. Connector is fundamentally this blue circle at the end of the line. And what it allows me to do is link any diagram I want to another diagram that also has a connector. What I have now done is ensured that the part of the interaction that is specific to and begins within Gainsight is captured on the Gainsight system, whereas part of their interaction that relates to Service Cloud and case object specifically is captured in its respective hierarchy. And now I can do the same for for my product management app. I can navigate to another part of my Salesforce org, a different application. I can find my desired object and paste that part of the interaction there. To sum up, within roughly 30 minutes, I was able to update several diagrams, identify multiple metadata components, both in Salesforce and in external systems that will need to be deleted or created, and I've managed to raise multiple user stories as a result of my analysis.